Moving on, the European Parliament has approved measures that allow rejected asylum seekers to be sent from the European Union to so-called return hubs in countries outside the EU. Despite parliamentary approval, the idea remains highly controversial within the bloc. For more, we can talk to Hans Brandt, correspondent with our partner DW in Berlin. Hans, what does the new deal involve really?
What we're talking about here is the so-called common European asylum system, which has been under negotiation for a couple of years already and was finally approved this week. It involves a whole lot of measures that are meant to coordinate asylum processing in all the more than 20 European Union countries, so that asylum seekers can no longer kind of pick and choose which country they would like to go to. It's also meant to relieve stress on the countries on the borders of the European Union, countries such as Italy and Spain, where most of the irregular migrants arrive. It envisages a whole lot of measures that make dealing with asylum seekers a lot more strict, there are a lot more sanctions that can be imposed against them, a lot more pressure can be put on them, and it will be the same measures across the European Union. But the most controversial part of this is this attempt to set up centres outside the European Union, so-called return hubs in countries maybe in North Africa, maybe in Egypt or maybe in Tunisia, so that people that are rejected by the asylum system in the European Union, but that cannot be sent back to their countries of origin, will then be sent to these return hubs somewhere outside the European Union. They will leave the territory of the European Union and then stay in these hubs for an indefinite period.
Okay, we learned that critics of these measures were outvoted. What happened?
Yes, there are obviously critics, especially on the left of the political spectrum, the social democratic parties, the Greens parties, that have said that human rights of the asylum seekers are going to be violated by this system, that we may expect a situation such as in the United States, where immigration officials can storm into apartments or into houses or pick up people off the street and put them into detention. And also, of course, there was much criticism about these return hubs, which potentially can turn out to be just detention centers with indefinite detention. But what happened is that in the European Parliament, there was a very unusual cooperation between conservative parties, such as the Christian Democratic Party here in Germany, and far right-wing extremist parties, which are also represented in the European Parliament. The right-wing parties have made migration their major issue, have always politicized on that issue. And this cooperation between normal conservative parties and right-wing extremists formed a majority in the European Parliament, which allowed this measure to be pushed through.
So what are the chances of actually putting these plans into practice?
Yes, that's the big question. Will these return hubs ever really be set up? At the moment, there is no country in the world that has said that it is prepared to do this in cooperation with the European Union. And there are a couple of examples that show that it's going to be very difficult. The United Kingdom, under Prime Minister Boris Johnson in the early 20s, tried to do something like this together with Rwanda in East Africa. Rwanda was agreed to take asylum seekers from the United Kingdom and to process their applications in Rwanda. The UK spent hundreds of millions of pounds to try and implement the system, but it actually never was implemented. It never really happened. And then here in the European Union, there's Italy. It has set up some camps in neighboring Albania, but that process has also never really gotten off the ground properly, with courts in Italy criticizing those plans by the government again and again. So there too, it's just an experiment that hasn't really worked so far. The question, of course, is also which country would be prepared to do this. It would be a very, very expensive project for the European Union, because those countries would require a lot of payment. And, of course, there will also be challenges in court. So the questions of human rights connected to such camps being set up still has to be cleared up in front of courts. So at the moment, it all seems like a big plan, but that seems to be very far in the future, its implementation.
Hans, thank you for joining us with those updates from Berlin. Moving on, Myanmar President Un Min Aung Hlaing